New York. That was Florida Governor and likely 2024 presidential hopeful Ron DeSantis. He has gone after President Joe Biden and his immigration policies before. But today, a significant escalation in that fight. DeSantis is taking credit for flying 2 planes yesterday to Martha's Vineyard. Those planes were filled with 50 human beings, migrants from Venezuela. The New York Times writes this, quote, "It was escalating a tactic in which Republican-led states have shipped busloads of migrants to liberal bastions like Washington and New York to protest the significant rise in illegal immigration under President Biden." The Times reports, quote, "The migrant group, which included children, arrived on 2 planes around 3 p.m. without any warning." It's according to State Senator Julian Cyr, a Massachusetts Democrat representing Cape Cod, Martha's Vineyard, and Nantucket. Officials and volunteers from the island's 6 towns, quote, "really moved heaven and earth to essentially set up the response that we would do in the event of a hurricane," he said. State Representative Dylan Fernandez tweeted out this photo saying, quote, "Our island jumped into action, putting together 50 beds, giving everyone a good meal, providing a play area for the children, making sure people have the health care and support they need. We are a community that comes together to support immigrants." Congressman Bill Keating of Massachusetts described the situation this morning and went after DeSantis for using migrants as political pawns.
They reported to me that these people got off the plane, men, women, and children from Venezuela, as they told me, and they had a map or instructions in their hand where they would get housing and jobs, and it was a vacant parking lot, the destination. And we contacted our governor. In fact, Jim, this is interesting. This is a tale of 2 governors, 2 Republican governors. One who was using taxpayer money for chartered jets and reportedly his own video photographer to capture this for his own political benefit, taking advantage of women and children, men who didn't know where they were going. And another governor in Massachusetts that we contacted in his office who put his nose to the grindstone and had his agency spring into action and along with local officials deal with the manufacturing crisis.
Today, news of more migrants being transported, this time ordered by Texas Governor Greg Abbott, who has been sending migrants around the country for months now. The AP reports this, quote, 2 buses of migrants from the U.S.-Mexico border were dropped off near Vice President Kamala Harris's home in residential Washington on Thursday morning in the bitter political battle over the Biden administration's immigration policies. Meanwhile, just last week, D.C. Mayor Muriel Bowser declared a public emergency over the continued arrival of buses of migrants. It's where we begin the hour with some of our favorite reporters and friends. Miles Taylor is here, former chief of staff at the Department of Homeland Security and the co-founder of a newly launched national political party called Forward. Basil Smikle is back. He's a Democratic strategist and also the director of the public policy program at Hunter College. With us at the table, former CIA director and MSNBC senior national security analyst John Brennan's here. And Harry Litman's back, former U.S. attorney, former deputy assistant attorney general. He's the host of the podcast Talking Feds. I think people want to know what's supposed to happen. Karine Jean-Pierre took that question from the podium. Let me show that to you.
There's a process in place. We have had a process in place. There's a legal way of doing this. And for managing migrants, Republican governors interfering in that process and using migrants as political pawns is shameful, is reckless, and just plain wrong. And remember, these are people who are fleeing communism, who are fleeing hardship. And if these governors truly care about border security, they should ask Texas Governor Ted Cruz and Florida Senators Marco Rubio and Rick Scott why they voted against the president's request for record funding for the Department of Homeland Security.
So, Director Brennan, I worked for a president who saw the issue of illegal immigration in a way that was not in line with his party. He agreed with the late Ted Kennedy and the late John McCain. I think in his heart he believed in amnesty, as President Ronald Reagan did. The Republican Party has become xenophobic, and this feels like an escalation in that ideology, that they are now willing to move humans around like pieces on a game board as political pawns and symbols.
As you point out, Nicole, these are human beings. And as you look at the footage, there are men, women, and children that are there. And as now we're getting closer and closer, I think, to the midterm elections, I think you're going to see more of this politicking on the part of public officials. And it's very unfortunate that Ron DeSantis and others are going to then use the immigration issue and the border security issue, which is a very, very important one. There's no easy solution to it. However, what you shouldn't do is to use these human beings in this politicking that they're getting into. And so therefore, I'm just really pleased to see that the people on Martha's Vineyard welcome these people and try to make sure that as difficult as a situation this is for them, that they're going to try to make them at least comfortable and show them that the United States is a welcoming country. And despite what Ron DeSantis or others do, there are communities in this country that are going to try to do everything possible to stay true to our values as a country that welcomes immigrants, that welcomes those who are not as fortunate as we are.
What is the solution when you've got the governors of states like Florida and Texas not interested in being part of the solution, but playing politics with this issue?
Well, this is where I think President Biden really has tried to do what a president is supposed to be doing, which is to recognize that the federal government has certain rights receiving these individuals that are coming across the border. So it has to be a balance of, I think, ensuring that our laws are going to be followed, but to also make sure that the people who present themselves at the border and risk their lives coming across the border are not going to be abused and mishandled. And so therefore, I do think it's important that President Biden, just like he did with the pending rail strike, is to actually engage. And I think that's what the White House administration is doing, to make sure that there's going to be this federal government interaction with the state and local authorities so that we can some way, that when you push the politics out of this, you take care of it in a way that both protects our national security and our homeland security, but at the same time shows the compassion and the empathy and the values that the United States is known for.
Is it illegal to do what they're doing?
I think it is. It's certainly sickening, right, on a couple levels. It's really, especially their kind of pride at it.
Pompeo was laughing about it.
Right. They were making, good jokes about it. I mean, it's sickening in their disregard for two classes of populations, both the 50 migrants and, of course, the very overstressed small winter population of Martha's Vineyard. There is a law, there's a criminal law that makes it a crime, but it's essentially used, what it really is moving around migrants, and typically it's for people who are trying to take them to safety. I think what ought to happen here, and I don't know, but they ought to bring a civil action to enjoin DeSantis and enjoin anyone else from messing with what is a quintessential. It's a very tough problem, deep thicket, but it's a federal problem. This is a quintessential problem for the federal government, and they're mucking around in this way to score political points, besides being, grotesque, is also against the law. It would be a hard law to make stick, and you're not going to bring a criminal action against DeSantis, but I think a civil action to enjoin, as far as I can see, ought to work.
Miles, you were the chief of staff of the Department of Homeland Security. I remember the day that ProPublica broke a story. It might have just been audio. It broke in my hour. It was the sound of toddlers wailing. It was the same time that images broke of children in cages from the Trump-era Department of Homeland Security. And it seemed at that moment that the cruelty of the Republican vision for how we treat human beings who come here from other countries. Laura Bush spoke out. Other former normal Republicans spoke out about the inhumanity. And it feels like DeSantis and Abbott took a page from that and went deeper down the hole into the muck. Do you feel any culpability for what the Trump-era Department of Homeland Security put in motion?
Well, I mean, as you know, Nicole, the really very sick BS I saw in immigration is what I cited when I resigned from the administration and left. I think those are, frankly, some of the most grotesque policies of that time period. Some of the people who were the architects of them at the White House are now people who have, we know, advised some of these governors on these tactics. And they should be held accountable for that. I think that using migrants as pawns here is exceptionally twisted. I'd agree with John and Harry on that point. And I'm not even so sure. I'm not a lawyer like Harry is. I'm not even so sure that there's not other hooks for the government to use against these two governors. And I'll give you an example, Nicole. Before I quit, Trump asked us to do basically this. He asked the Department of Homeland Security to go bus and dump, in his words, bus and dump migrants from the border into democratic cities. In particular, he wanted us to pick out the murderers and the drug dealers, the violent ones, and really put those in places. We went to our general counsel's office to find every way to go tell them that was illegal. We got enough options to go back to the White House and say, I put all of the senior staff on an email and said, this is illegal. Now tell me you want to do it. And there was crickets on the chain. I suspect right now that the administration and hopefully the Department of Homeland Security are looking at ways, whether it's human trafficking laws or something else, to hold the governors accountable. Do we have an immigration crisis? Of course, there is a crisis at the border. That's not Joe Biden's fault. That's Congress's fault. Congress needs to fix this. Like you said at the top end, we need a humane immigration policy like George W. Bush was trying to pursue. We need a compromise. That's the only way we're going to get this done. And in the meantime, screwing with people's lives like this after they've come off a dangerous journey is just as bad as anything Trump did. It goes right up there to the top of grotesque behavior.
Basil and Miles, I appreciate your candor and your reflection at the Trump era inner workings of this. Basil, this is something that has bedeviled Democratic and Republican administrations for decades. And the problem, as Miles said, is that it lies in the Congress and not even gridlock, the refusal to acknowledge and really deal with the problem. It lies in the complicated nature of the problem itself. That said, there isn't time for us to get our ducks in a row while children are pushed onto air. I mean, there is something so apocalyptic about small children being loaded onto planes and lied to and flown all over. I mean, the terror and the lack of empathy for what these human beings go through feels like another indication of sort of the cancer in right-wing politics at this hour.
Yeah, I have to say this. It's despicable. It's inhumane. And for those that don't know, particularly in the case of Governor DeSantis, it's actually connected to some very racist history. Because in the early 60s, in the backlash of orders to integrate the South, you had freedom riders going south. There was a backlash, and Southern segregationists engaged in reverse freedom rides and sent African-American individuals, families, children to northern cities, including Hyannis, near the home of JFK, dropped them off with the same kind of promise that DeSantis gave these migrants, that they would have jobs, they would have opportunities, and of course they had nothing, and they were dropped off in the middle of a place they didn't know, among people they did not know. So the fact that there's this sad connection with these two incidents suggests that this deplorable behavior is spiteful. And when anyone says "Make America Great Again," we know exactly the time, the place, and the behavior that they're referring to. And as we try to sort of prosecute Trump and Trumpism, this is how far it extends, and perhaps even further. And where are those sanctuary congregations, not just the sanctuary cities, because we know that they're receiving a lot of these individuals and these families, but where are the sanctuary congregations that we saw in the 80s when the Central Americans were coming here? Those Christian conservatives, those evangelicals that were embracing them then, they're not doing so now. And so you just have to think that where were the people who really care about public service? People like DeSantis and Abbott shouldn't even be holding office, let alone thinking, at least in the case of one of them, running for a higher office.
Yeah, Miles, I was thinking as I read this story, as it sort of came across the wire last night, about just how dangerous to other human beings the DeSantis-Abbott primary is going to be over the next 2 years.
Yeah, you really got to think, Nicole, that you said this at the top end. John said this. Harry said this. Basil said this. We're talking about human lives here. Politics has gotten so corrosive now that we've totally taken the human element out. And these decisions are being made without regard to the fact that these are children and their parents and their vulnerable populations. And again, it's important to note that that didn't start with DeSantis and Abbott, right? A lot of this behavior started in the Trump administration. And when I said at one point, I think it was on your show, Nicole, that the cruelty is the point, that is what they are carrying forward with their policies. I think we all hoped in 2020 that we'd put a stake in the heart of Trumpism. These guys are keeping it alive. They're the new zombies of Trumpism. And for them, for DeSantis and Abbott, the cruelty is the point. They want to create some sort of deterrence by, again, mucking about with these people's lives. What I would like to see is people quit their administrations and speak out, like during the Trump administration. Where are the people in Florida who know this is wrong? Where are the people in Texas who know this is wrong and also can point out the ways it's being implemented, perhaps against state law or in contravention of, the good conscience of these people who became public servants? That's what I want to see. And I hope we do see that soon, in addition to the federal government finding ways to shut this down. At the same time, we also should see Congress pick up its efforts to find a good solution to the border security crisis, but also the humanitarian crisis. The facilities down at the border are not good facilities. They're not welcoming facilities. We do not look like a shining city on a hill when people come here. They come here and they feel like they're in concrete bunkers when they arrive. This is not what America should look like, and it's time for us to wake up and do something about it.
All right, no one is going anywhere. When we come back, there are new developments across those myriad investigations into the twice impeached, disgraced ex-president and his innermost circle. They clearly fear the Justice Department's investigation may be more expansive than has been publicly known prior to this week. Plus, stunning new reporting from our friends Peter Baker and Susan Glasser. They are out with a new book. It says that former Trump Chief of Staff John Kelly actually purchased and consulted a book that concluded the ex-president was psychologically unfit for the job he held. The book also says that Kelly used the book as a guide that tells us how Trump world is feeling about all the latest investigative developments, new ones every single day, including today, across multiple serious criminal investigations involving the ex-president's conduct. With 40-plus DOJ subpoenas issued to people in Trump's inner circle this week, a source telling NBC News that his former chief of staff, Mark Meadows, is now the highest-ranking Trump official to be complying with a DOJ subpoena. And a new filing giving us specifics of what DOJ could be looking at as possible crimes in its investigation. Politico is reporting that Trump's allies and aides have been shaken, and advisors fear the DOJ probe is more expansive than publicly known because, quote, every day feels like something else is piling on, they say. It also comes as we witness what appears to be new momentum from the January 6th committee this week as they round out their investigation. Today in Georgia, that Fulton County District Attorney probe and leader is saying that her team has received allegations that serious crimes were committed that could lead to prison sentences. We're back with our panel. Harry, you read through the culmination of what is now just 18 months of a non-Barr-led Justice Department and of a congressional, not even bipartisan effort, but really a Democratic-led effort with two Republicans participating. And at that level, it's not surprising. It's pretty remarkable what they've churned up in 18 months. But from the other sort of purge, you look at how bad it really was, and it exceeds how bad we thought it was watching from the outside for 4 years.
Yeah, I think that's right. And the Berman book really speaks to this as well. There was rot in D.C., and it was especially in pockets that were controlling. So people that we really haven't even heard of, or only the sort of biggest DOJ insiders, were picking up the phone and calling shots that were, very frankly political, the exact antithesis of what DOJ was supposed to be doing. And, certainly the people who were there, the rank and file, were in a kind of, we're hinting at it, and we now sort of understand. You go to DOJ for justice without fear or favor, and it was all about fear and favor.
And Harry's talking, Director Brennan, about Jeff Berman's book, where he names names. He talks about Bill Barr's complete and utter corruption, and he names the names of his lieutenants. Mostly singles out Ed O'Callaghan, who was the paydag, and Brian Rabbitt, who was Barr's chief of staff. It is an interesting frame, though, to examine the advanced nature of the Mar-a-Lago criminal probe and the fact that Trump committed brazen acts of obstruction. It seems to be almost a relic of his conduct while Barr was there to protect him.
Yeah, I think it's been clear that Donald Trump has always felt as though he didn't have to follow the rules or the laws, whether before he got into the White House as well as when he was there and afterward. And so therefore, it's unsurprising that he decided to take these documents to Mar-a-Lago, believing that they were his. But as you said, it's a blatant disregard and the reckless disregard, not just for the rule of law, but also for our national security. The fact that he left unsecured for 19 months or so, some of this nation's most precious and highly sensitive secrets, possibly putting human lives at risk, sensitive technical collection programs, revealing to our adversaries our capabilities as well as possible weaknesses. These are the things that I think, as you pointed out at the beginning, he's twice impeached, disgraced ex-president, and it shows just when he was in that White House, being the deeply corrupt person he is, I think it just permeated throughout the administration. And having someone like Bill Barr, who I think Trump was hoping was going to be his Roy Cohn, was going to protect him from these types of legal jeopardy, issues. I think it just, again, reveals, and I'm so glad that Jeff Berman has come out and is revealing and peeling back that onion just how corrupt it was during this period of our history that was so critical, I think, to our nation.
I remember your congressional testimony about Russia's attack on the U.S. election and about the Trump team's either witting or unwitting, I think, knowledge or acquiescence to a shared mission, which is basically what Mueller found, a shared mission, if not evidence of coordination, chargeable evidence of coordination. You now have in the Mar-a-Lago documents that have been unsealed very clear evidence that even if Trump, let's give him the most generous read, even if he unwittingly took hundreds and hundreds of the most sensitive intelligence documents created by our government, human intelligence, FISA material, things that aren't supposed to leave the originator. He was asked by the National Archives multiple times. He was asked by DOJ multiple times. He was subpoenaed by a grand jury. And then the government went in to get what wasn't turned over. And even then, there were lies told by Trump's team about where these things were. If you have to go in and offer the same sort of analysis of witting or unwitting hoarding of state secrets, where do you come down based on what you've read in the government filings?
I think there's no doubt whatsoever that he knew exactly what he was doing. It was intentional. He knew that he shouldn't have those documents. This absurd claim that he declassified things is just absurd. Right. There's no way. And the fact that he brought them down there, and it does seem as though there was a fair amount of obstruction of justice as they were moved about, and the National Archives and the Department of Justice were told untruths about whether or not those documents were there. And so you're talking about the investigation into Russian interference in the election and Bill Barr's blatant mischaracterization of what the Mueller report found. The Mueller report found that although there was extensive collusion, there wasn't the evidence that he was able to uncover for criminal conspiracy.
Right.
But I would think that criminal conspiracy here, in terms of trying to avoid any type of understanding that, in fact, these documents were in Mar-a-Lago, is something that I think Donald Trump, as well as others down there, are really going to be, I think, vulnerable to a potential future indictment.
Yeah, Miles, when you're talking about how you had to marshal the law to get people not to do inhumane things, that feels like a pattern. I mean, Don McGahn and his deputies had to argue, I think, untruthfully, that firing Comey was not legal or would bring about legal consequences to try to get him to not do that. Of course, Donald Trump ultimately does it anyway. But having to use the law and the fact that that didn't work with Trump is such an interesting window into how he saw himself as above the law or as representing the law. What do you make when you read the government filings and watch the back and forth over the Mar-a-Lago case?
Well, Nicole, you framed it perfectly. It's why this thing has gone from, in my words, MAGA-gate to mega MAGA-gate, because there were so many different attempts at illegality that now we're going to remember this week as the week that they all rolled into one giant conspiracy case, because that's what this is. I mean, put aside the fact that in New York, you've got civil and I think criminal probes into the Trump organization and what's going on in Georgia. This DOJ case has got threads into fraudulent electors, into fraudulent fundraising schemes, into fraudulent authorities about how to interrupt the peaceful transfer of power. And then you add on top of it a separate case on the Mar-a-Lago documents. You do realize these things all have a central thread. It's Donald Trump. And now this week, I think all around Washington and other states, you can hear the sound of iPhones being run over by cars as some of his former aides are probably thinking, oh, shoot, I'm about to get ensnared in this. And they will, because this was likely a massive criminal conspiracy that has so many ends. I mean, I'm curious for the lawyers that are on this segment, how on earth you do an investigation like this that has so many potential prongs.
Mega MAGA-gate, I like it. So it is completely sprawling, and I think the short answer is you do it all. And, for a department that was being criticized not long ago for seemingly behind on the curve, it's really clear they're doing it all. And as you say, every week, every day, we found out more today about Mark Meadows, maybe Jeff Clark.
Right.
They are casting a broad
Yesterday
net.
It was the pillow guy.
Right.
Yeah, every day.
And then you sift through. It's a different kind of task than for the committee, because they can think about a sprawling single mega MAGA-gate conspiracy, but more likely they're looking at discrete crimes and figuring out which way to go. On that choice, though, the most stark is January 6th and any of the welter of crimes that came from there, or Mar-a-Lago, discrete precedent setting, and I think now pretty clear, for the reasons John and others say, totally righteous, so brazen. Of course, what he's saying in court now, it's just a little document storage problem.
So lame,
the brazen,
right,
and the declassification, but he won't say it in court. I mean, it looks, on top of everything else, like really justified, because it embodies this central Trump sin of thinking he can do anything, and there's no such thing as a public interest. There's just the Trump interest.
Yeah. Everyone sticks around, because when we get back, there is some news today about how one of the most senior former top Trump White House officials tried to deal with a mentally unfit, mocha test-taking and dangerously uninformed president. According to a brand new book reported out by Peter Baker and his wife, Susan Glasser, retired General John Kelly, while serving as Trump's second chief of staff, secretly sought guidance from a book in which 27 mental health professionals warned that Donald Trump was psychologically unfit, that his mental state was dangerous to our nation's well-being. I read this book. It's terrifying. Peter Baker and Susan Glasser write in The Divider, Trump in the White House, this, quote, among those who secretly bought a copy of the psychiatrist's book was none other than John Kelly, who sought help to understand the president's particular psychoses and consulted it while he was running the White House, which he was known to refer to as, quote, Crazy Town. John Kelly told others that the book was a helpful guide to a president he came to consider a pathological liar, whose inflated ego was, in fact, a sign of a deeply insecure person. We're back with everyone. I have no words, Basil Smikle.
Well, since you gave me permission to put something in my cup, it'll be Jamaican Rand White rum. But no, I absolutely think that this is scary stuff. I mean, there's no question about it. And for all of those times when people said we shouldn't be armchair psychologists, we knew what we were looking at. Voters knew what they were seeing. They were seeing a president like they had never seen before, somebody that seemed unhinged, spiteful, vengeful, certainly not policy-oriented, and someone who, as Miles said earlier, that was intent between him and some of his acolytes on inflicting cruelty on the American people. And so I'm excited to read the text. But to Harry's point earlier, it's not just the president. There are people who we are hearing about that are testifying either by choice or by force But that means that there are so many others that are still within government that we do not know, people who are public facing that may still be sort of carrying out the wishes, intentions, and I don't know, of this man who clearly was and still is unfit for office.
You know, Miles, I want to know from your experiences and what you saw, what John Kelly viewed as a tripwire to secretly purchase a book about a mentally ill president and try to understand him from a psychiatric perspective.
Well, I've definitely got the right cup to be sipping out of for this conversation. I'll tell you this, Nicole, probably the real answer is his first meeting, with Donald Trump. I came in very early with John Kelly, and he didn't come into the administration and I didn't come into the administration because we thought it was going to be a fun ride or anyone was going to end with a better reputation. Kelly was very clear-eyed from the beginning that Donald Trump at best, was untested and unstable. And he came very quickly to the realization that Donald Trump was unfit for office. I mean, I remember as early as June of the president's first year, members of the cabinet were talking about the 25th Amendment. That doesn't necessarily mean they were sitting in a dim basement planning to do it. But that term, 25th Amendment, was coming out of their mouths in Donald Trump's first summer in office. And I'm sure it was whispered in the spring in times that I wasn't present. That gives you an indicator of just after a few months of exposure to the man, how worried his lieutenants were about his mental state. And that's because he couldn't, it's all the things we know. He couldn't focus in meetings. We were told that 10-page memos had to be whittled down to one-page memos. One-page memos had to be whittled down to pictures. Pictures had to be whittled down to cartoons. And you think I'm being facetious here? I'm not being facetious. That's what we had to do. At one point, there were things that we went in and we had people mock up CAD drawings, like those computer-generated cartoons of things that we were talking about to help him understand. When you are a John Kelly, and you are Secretary of Homeland Security and you see that, your immediate reaction is the White House is in total turmoil. Did John Kelly want to go be White House Chief of Staff? I don't think he did. Hell no. Who would have wanted that job at the time? But in my mind, it was a good man jumping on a grenade thrown by a bad man. And Kelly hoped he could stabilize that White House. And very unfortunately, he found that the only way to do that is the president himself wanting to be more disciplined. And that was never going to happen.
Miles Taylor, Basil Smigel, Director John Brennan, Harry Litman. It's been real. Thank you very much for being here.